Alright, welcome to today's video. In this video, I will be making a full cosplay for a friend of mine. This cosplay is something she created, like the design and everything. It's for an original character of hers from a story that she's currently working on turning into a video game. It's epic, it's awesome, and she asked me to make the main character's dress, and I was thrilled. So, I went out, I got the cloth, I got way more than I needed, which I'm like, that is such a smart thing to do. Okay, I've never done that before, and it was so nice to have, like, just tons of cloth. So if I made a mistake, I was good. You know what? I highly recommend that. I highly recommend being prepared for making a mistake, because I'm not usually like that. But yeah, anyway, I did not have any specific pattern for this dress, because it was an original character's dress. So I just used a pattern for a different skirt that I had, and I kind of messed around with it. I traced out one half of it just like this, as you can see. And this skirt is actually part of a dress that I have, but I just did the skirt part. And I did 2 of these panels so that the skirt would have plenty of flounce, because she wanted plenty of flounce. She also wanted me to be able to pleat the skirt, so obviously you need some extra cloth on the skirt if you're going to pleat it, because you're going to be taking in a lot of that cloth. And then I just measured it, because the skirt is actually in stripes. There's a blue stripe, a white stripe, and then another blue stripe. So I had to cut out the middle stripe so that I could replace it with a white stripe later. So did a lot of measuring for that. Sewing takes a lot of math. And I'm learning that, and it's not fun, but you know what? It's worth it for cosplays. But yeah, a lot of measuring, a lot of making sure I had everything right, and then cutting out all my little stripes. And then basically the way I split it into stripes, I just calculated how long it was, split that into 3 sections, and then marked out where the middle section would be based upon those calculations. It was actually pretty simple. Some of the other math that I had to do for this dress was like more complicated, but this was pretty easy. It's not that big a deal. And then I just went up and made sure that I was marking the lines that were all even with that middle section, and then cut it out. And easy peasy, we're done. Then I just laid that middle section on top of my white cloth, because that was easier than figuring out whatever measurements again. And I just did this twice. I just laid it out and then basically just traced around it. And again, did it twice and then cut it all out. And I was done. Then I hemmed every single strip of cloth, because I wanted this to be really durable. So I double hemmed it, and then I sewed it all together. And then I sewed the 2 pieces, because I had 2 panels of this, I sewed the 2 pieces together along one side. And then remember I said I needed pleats, so I cut out this piece of cardboard, and I had to do a lot of math for this, but once I figured that out, then I just went back and I did like little folds over the cardboard back and forth and pinned them in place to make sure that I was doing all my pleats in the right way. And I did have to redo it like 3 times before I had my pleats measurements correctly. It takes a lot of figuring out, but I got it, and then I sewed them in place, and it looked like this. It looked awesome. It looked epic. I was so happy with it. Then, of course, my sewing machine realized I was happy and decided to explode. So that was fun. But moving on. Anyway, I had to do a band on the skirt, so I basically did this, and it didn't work like that, and I had to go back and watch a couple tutorials and figure out how to do a band like at the waistband of the skirt. And basically you take a piece of cloth and you pin it in place like this. Make sure that when you sew the band on first like this, you're sewing beneath where like all your hemming lines were, because you want to cover those up. So it looks like that, and then you're just going to fold it over like that and sew up along the width there. Not the length, the width, because you need to close up that little edge at the corner there. And then all you do is flip it inside out like I have here, and you have a smooth little edge. If you're doing as I'm doing and you wanted to be able to buckle the skirt around itself, you need to leave a little bit on the edge there so that you have something that can actually wrap around the waistband and click into place. I use these button clasps, and I actually put them all along the inside of the waistband before I officially sewed it up, because I'm doing this cosplay in 2 pieces, a skirt and a shirt, and this way I can buckle them together once I put button clasps on the shirt's waistband. And then as you can see here, I just went in and sewed up the rest of the band. Then I took my last two edges of the skirt and I sewed them up together, added a few more button clasps at the top there so she had space to fit into her skirt, and done. Moving on to the shirt. I took this tank top, and she didn't want sleeves the way the tank top had it, so I basically just folded the sleeves of the tank top down, as you'll see in a second, to make sure that I was just having like a panel of cloth, essentially. And then I cut it out, well, I marked it and left 2 inches of space. You can see only 1 inch of space here, but I went back and I added more later because I wanted to make sure I had plenty cloth to work with. She wanted the shirt a little baggy, so that's what I did here. And obviously, I needed 2 panels of this, and then I hemmed it all up because I was trying to make this super sturdy, so I hemmed everything before I sewed it together. And then I sewed it together on one side. My cloth was not stretchy, so I knew that I was going to need the other side to button up, so only sewed it on one side right there where I pinned it. And then she wanted a flounce around the top too, so that's what I'm cutting out here. I used this board to kind of make sure all my lines were straight, and just cut out the piece of cloth that I was going to use for my nice little flounce. Did a lot of measuring to make sure it was all even too. It's quite the process. More math, so much math. But I needed a really long flounce because she wanted pleats in the flounce too, so, you know, extra cloth is needed. And then I just cut it all out. And since I'd already done pleats in the skirt, this was a little easier. I just used a smaller piece of cardboard and did the little fold over thing, made sure that I had them all spaced out evenly so that they would all sit the way that she wanted them to on the dress around the shoulders. I did have to redo it twice. You can see the end there is not quite long enough, so I went back and I moved the pleats over more so that they would just sit better on, like, around her shoulders, so that there wouldn't be a flounce on one of her shoulders, and it would instead be on the back of the flounce and the front of the flounce, not the sides. When you're doing pleats like this, you want to make sure that you do have them spaced out properly, because you're not just folding up cloth, you're like tripling the fold, if that makes sense. So each section of cloth that I did here was 1 inch, but it really takes up 3 inches because of the way that you fold it. So that's the main thing with the math that really needs to be focused on when you're doing this. But yeah, I finished that, and then I just went and I sewed each flounce closed, and I didn't sew down the whole thing, I just sewed over the flounce. Alright, and remember I mentioned the button clasps. These are the open halves of the shirt, so I just sewed my button clasps. Man, I can't speak. Yeah, I sewed those along the sides, and I did an interchangeable pattern. So, like, I didn't do the same half of a button clasp on all one side of the shirt. I did it interchangeably. That way, when she's buttoning herself up and she can't really look down at herself to see what buttons she's doing, it's easier to feel which buttons go with which other side of the shirt, if that makes sense. And then I took my flounce and I sewed it to the top of the shirt, making sure to leave the space at the sides, as you can see there, for her arms to go through, because that flounce needs to go around her shoulders. And it closed up like that. I thought it looked pretty good, and I started on the straps. I just took a piece of cloth like this, folded it over, and sewed it shut, and then sewed one end shut, leaving one end open so that I can do this, just flip it inside out. And then I have some nice clean lines. You gotta poke it out with like a pencil or something, make sure you have some sharp corners there, and then you just fold the other end in and you sew it up just like that. And you have yourself a strap. And obviously you need 2 of these. Pinned them in place like this, made sure that it was going to fit right. It was really easy because this friend is about the same size as me, which helped because it meant I could try everything on, make sure it was going to fit her properly. Once I had the straps in place, I took this little band. I wanted to cover up all those ugly seams, so I basically replicated the waistband I did on the skirt, and I just did it on the top here. The only difference is that you don't have to leave something out at the end, because it's all going to need to, like, close up around the waistband. Nothing needs to hang over and button or anything. Just make sure when you are pinning that in place, you're making sure that you're covering up all the seams you're trying to cover, because if you sew it a little too close to the edge, then there might be some little seams, some threads, a bit of the ugly part of the top of the flounces or the pleats that's still visible, and nobody wants that. So the way that these bands work is that you sew them on like that, and then you fold them over and fold up the other side, basically doing a hem and a seam all in once, and then you sew in the seam of the other thing. I didn't show it because it was so difficult that, like, I couldn't film while I was doing it. I needed to focus. But you fold it over and then fold up the end, and then you sew so that that little fold that you have on the outside is where the seam goes. Right like that. You sew right where those pins are. So then your seam hides in the fold, basically. It's really difficult and detailed, but yeah, that's why I didn't film it, because I needed my entire mind there. Alright, so now I'm doing another waistband at the bottom of the shirt because I need the shirt to be able to clip into the skirt, and the skirt's waistband was currently smaller than the shirt's waistband. And I did leave about an inch of space on the end just so that I could do everything neatly, and I would just trim off any excess at the end. Now, the main difference with this band was that I had to fold up little bits of the end of the shirt because the band needed to be the same length as the skirt's band, and the shirt was longer. So you just have to make little folds in it and pin that in place and then sew that in place. And then once you have it sewn on, you fold it in half just like the other ones, and you sew up close to where the shirt ends, which you can see here in just a second. You don't sew all the way at the end of the band. You sew close to the shirt because that's where you want the waistband to end, essentially. So just like that, there was going to be some excess cloth on the end there, and again, you can just trim that away, easy peasy, no problem. And once you have that cut away, you just flip it inside out, and you have your nice little neat corner, and you fold up that other half so that it's like a hem again. And then you just pin that in place, and then you sew it, just like all the other ones. Okay, so the last piece for this dress was a sash that was going to go around the middle to cover up where the waistbands buttoned together so that it looked like a full dress. Also, the character has a sash with a big bow in the back, so I wanted to replicate that as well, and she wanted her bow in the back, which was actually super fun to figure out how to do. I've never sewn a bow, but I figured out for this cosplay, and they're actually super easy. We'll see in a minute. But for the sash, I just took a strip of cloth that was the right length and folded it over basically the same way I did my straps for the shirt. And you just got to make sure you leave one end open so you can flip it inside out afterwards. Now, the funny thing is, you make the exact same thing for the bow, except you sew the corners on an angle like that. So when you flip them inside out, they're like triangles. And then you fold the bow over like this, get it to the size that you want it to be, and then you flip it over and scrunch up the middle. And don't just completely scrunch, you want to fold it a little bit, but that gives you your bow. You sew that so it's not going to come apart, and then you take a little band of cloth and wrap it around the center, and voila, you have a bow. And then all you do is sew it onto your sash along with some button clasps so that your sash will button closed around your waist. Alright, well, if you're still watching after that incredibly long video, here's the final product. Let me show you the skirt. Here's the skirt. Here's the back. I have my nice little bow in my sash. And yeah, I think this is honestly the best thing that I've ever sewn so far, and I'm still learning, so like, I'm obsessed with this. And I also got to make it for a friend, so like, there's nothing better than that. The bow is probably a little bit bigger than I was trying to make it, but you know what? It works, and I can always exchange it if she wants something a little smaller, so that works out too. Also, I don't think I pull off headbands very well anyway, so that's fine. Pleating is actually way easier than I thought it was, except for the math equation. So I did mention before, you have to fold it like once, then back, so it's really taking up 3 times 3 of however big 1/2 of the flounce is, which is difficult to try and calculate. But yeah, anyway, all that to say, finished product. I'm very happy. Thank you for watching this far in the video, and watch them more if you like them. And I mean, if you really liked it, like and subscribe.